I'm Mike Ward. I was the first task force commander for Operation KINETIC, Task Force Kosovo, in the spring of 1999.
And I understand today you want to talk a little bit about the refugee crisis at the time. What happened?
The Kosovo crisis had been ongoing for 5 or 6 years by the time that it really came to a head. The international community had been very, very heavily engaged, trying to get both sides to disentangle themselves to stop the bloodshed, and nothing had quite worked. It seemed that the aggressors that we were most concerned with were the Serbs. And the Serbs did a lot of damage to Kosovar Albanian communities, a lot of ethnic cleansing. And in the run-up to the bombing campaign that started in March of 1999, almost a million Kosovars were displaced, either internally in the country, externally into Macedonia and Albania, and many were repatriated overseas, as they were to Canada. Canada took in about 7,000 to 8,000 Kosovo refugees and housed them on all of our bases across the country. It was quite unexpected in early June of 1999 that the Serbs would fold and essentially declare that they were ready to negotiate with NATO about a ceasefire. And when they did that, these million Kosovars took that as a signal that they were ready to go back home. Unfortunately, they couldn't go back to their former housing and hamlets because the Serbs had largely razed all of all those buildings. They'd broken all. There was nothing left for people to return to. So there was a great rush amongst NATO and the international community to get back in before those Kosovar refugees to try and create some life support that they could access. Luckily, it was early in the summer, and so the weather was very good for them to go back, unlike what it was 6 months later when winter descended. But we had a real crisis on our hands to create those conditions that would support life going back to normal as they would have liked it. We had some very interesting things that weren't specifically kinetic force multipliers. We did have one PPCLI as the infantry battle group. We had a recce squadron from the Lord Strathcona's Horse, and they had the brand new Coyote, the first time it had been operationally deployed to any of the theaters of operations. And it was the gold standard in terms of providing covert surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities in and around the operational area in Kosovo. In addition, we had a flight of helicopters from 408 Squadron, and they were able to do all kinds of things, not just command and liaison aerial surveillance, but they could move humanitarian assistance around wherever it was needed. And then we had an opposite engineer squadron from one CER that had essentially a troop of combat engineers, and they had a troop of vertical engineers. So they could rebuild just about anything, and they could get water and electricity flowing. And those two things were in very, very short supply. Kosovo at night was essentially a black hole. The only lights that you could see were those that were coming from NATO camps, for instance. So the Kosovars were living very, very rough. And we could not get the international community forward deployed fast enough to begin to reduce the kinds of stresses they were facing. One of the things that was really unique about the task force was that many of them had had one, if not two tours in the former Yugoslavia already. So they understood the operational area. They understood the aggressors, the combatants, and they were quite comfortable with the kinds of circumstances that you expect professional military to be able to adapt to. And so they were very, very good in terms of dealing with the locals, dealing with the international community, and making things happen. And as an example, in our area, Pristina, we were in this valley, and the valley had no support whatsoever. The UN was not able to put a country rep into that area to begin to coordinate international assistance or refugee assistance. So in fact, we did it ourselves. And there was a fellow by the name of Major Doug Delaney, who was the humanitarian officer in one PPCLI, And he essentially took it upon himself to create a coffee shop where all of the NGOs could come in and they could talk about where they were dispensing aid and where there were gaps. And he created this massive map of the operational area where we could see who was getting assistance and who was not. And through his own particular charisma and personality, he was able to get all of these NGOs to organize according to a higher requirement, as opposed to just delivering on what their specific mandates were. And this made a huge difference in terms of being able to push things like roofing kits, window kits, to all of these destroyed houses so that the people could begin to sort out their lives. It was very impressive to watch. There was one other really interesting thing that I don't think any of us factored into our deployment plans, and that was in our camp in the Drnica Valley. On the weekend, 2 individuals from the helicopter squadron took it upon themselves to form a scout troop. And what they did was they invited kids from the local community, and they all came in and they were screened and they auditioned essentially to become parts of this scout troop. And they would meet every Sunday afternoon, and they would be taken through all kinds of interesting things that scouts do, including things like mine awareness, which was important. And this signaled to the community that we weren't coming in just as a security force. We were coming in to really try to help establish some normalcy in the lives of these former refugees. And it really created a tremendous relationship between us and them. And it helped us actually in terms of understanding some of the things that were going on, much better information and intelligence gathering, etc. So the Kosovo crisis was averted by, I think, tremendous leadership in Canada to sign on to assist them under the responsibility to protect protocol that Lloyd Axworthy had been famous in creating. But it was really the boots on the ground, the troops, who in all of their dealings every day really made life better for the Kosovars that we were there to help.
So I'm just curious, what impact do you think that had on those soldiers under your command, that particular experience in the Balkans, as opposed to what they might have experienced 5, 6, 7 years earlier if they were on the initial rotos, into Sarajevo Airport and things like that? Do you think was there a significant difference that way, do you think?
I would say one of the differences was that there was a much higher security challenge in Sarajevo in the early days, in 1991, 1992. So security had not been established. Peace enforcement was required. The circumstance that we found ourselves in were that both of the parties to the conflict had agreed that they would stop attacking each other, and therefore the security was much lower, and it wasn't on us. So we could really turn our attention to trying to mitigate some of the ethnic cleansing that had carried on, some of the vigilantism that was there, but it wasn't of the same order of magnitude that those troops in those first rotations into the Balkans faced. It was hardship. It was austere. It was difficult work. But it was also very satisfying work for the troops. They realized that everything they did, each one of them, everything they contributed, really did make a difference, and a difference right in front of them.
Seems like it was a more satisfying experience for the soldiers because of the different nature of the task and a different time and place.
So the other thing too is that the mission was new, so everything was encountered for the first time. Unlike by that time in the Balkans, it was a pretty mature theater. Things were quite stable. People were returning back to rotos that they had seen a year or two before, and it began to settle into routine. We didn't have that luxury in Kosovo during the 1 year that we had assigned troops to the mission.